These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
We take life back!
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of winds, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments, the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and the courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of raw nature. And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776 when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people have the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, maybe a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The economic royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy government's involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, until the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing to be so general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man. Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely historically invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers, stolen from the Indians, and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrants in the North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class, non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what some might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which asserted more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation, which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax rate paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy. And then it goes through the whole explanation of how that worked. The book is The Crash of 2016.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's Wednesday, Mittwoch, and a lot in the news. I want to start out with the evil reason why the Republican Party is going to exploit every crisis the world is facing. And many of these crises actually threaten democracies here in the United States, our democracy, and democracies around the world, particularly younger, weaker democracies. I'll get into that in detail in just a moment. Also, why is the Republican Party pretending that everything is just fine when Donald Trump is obviously guilty as hell? We'll get into that. And a crazy alert, in a few years, will you travel to the first space hotel instead of Mexico? In our second hour, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. Will the Russian Ruble oil scheme work? What does petrocurrency, or the U.S., the dollar being the world reserve currency, what does that mean? And how does that affect oil and the whole oil price? Also, I've got a great geeky science for you, the green cryptocurrency fossil fuel bullpucky exposed. And Koch, the Koch Industries, and Donald Trump refused to stop doing business in Russia. We'll get into that in our second hour. In our third hour, Joe Manchin has now come out and said he opposes Biden's plan to tax billionaires. What's this going to do to Democratic candidates in the upcoming election if Joe Manchin keeps frustrating attempts by the Biden administration to actually accomplish and pass legislation that the majority of Americans support? We'll get into that and talk about it in some depth in our third hour. Also, should Congress revisit Trump's perfect phone call to Zelinsky? This is actually a fascinating idea. A Republican is coming out and saying, hey, let's expunge that impeachment. And it might provide a basis for a whole brand new evaluation of what Donald Trump did. I'll get into that in the third hour. And also, why is Trump getting away with sabotaging Ukraine? So, again, in our third hour today. So a lot going on in the program. Just to start, the piece over at HartmannReport.com today, my daily, I call it daily rant, my kind of daily essay or daily op-ed. It's titled, "The Evil Reason the GOP Will Exploit Every Crisis the World is Facing." That reason, by the way, can be summarized in one word: power. And probably a second word, the money that comes with power or that produces power. But what I want to flag for you, and I think this is really important to understand, is that the war in Ukraine is producing a series of consequences that are in the process and within a few months are going to seriously be impacting the world in ways that will damage or threaten to damage democracies. This is serious as death. I mean, this is really serious stuff. Americans, somehow, we're like, oh yeah, look at that, Putin's retreating, or whatever. I mean, it's going to a stalemate. This is not the beginning of the end of this. I mean, here's the three things that the Republican Party has already essentially declared in the United States that they fully intend to exploit, and that you're going to see so-called conservative political parties, neo-fascist political parties in countries from obviously Hungary and Poland, they're already there, to France and Germany. You're going to see this right across Europe and around the world too, by the way. But I think the most immediate impact is going to be on Europe, and then secondarily on the United States this fall. That could destabilize democracies. And these three things are, number one, refugee crises. Number two, shortages and spikes in both the cost of food and fuel. In other words, inflation and shortages. And number three, a worldwide recession, which will come out of number two. So let's look at these one at a time here. The refugee crisis. Step in the Wayback Machine with me, back to 2016. Donald Trump was running for president, and the main talking point that the Republicans were pushing at that time, keep in mind, Trump had kicked off his candidacy a year earlier in 2015 by saying that, Mexican rapists and murderers were coming to the United States. So the main Republican talking point was that Obama have left the southern border wide open and anybody who wanted could come into America. And of course, that became a self-fulfilling prophecy. They were pounding on this on Fox News and on social media. The Russian trolls were amplifying it and doubling and tripling down on it. And guess what? American news doesn't just stay in America. It started popping up in Guatemala and Honduras and Nicaragua and El Salvador and southern Mexico, and people were going, oh, look at this. An American United States senator just said that the southern border is open. The largest cable news network in America just said that the southern border is open. Gee, maybe we should get in a car and head to the southern border of the United States. Look at this. Everybody's saying it. Not realizing that the Republican Party and Fox News were lying through their friggin' teeth. And what was the result of those people believing that? They showed up, they started caravans for the southern border. And what was the consequence of the caravans to the southern border? Donald Trump became president and the Republicans took control of the House and Senate in the 2016 elections. That was their main issue. Obama couldn't handle quack, quack, quack. So, understanding the impact that immigration can have on an election. Keep in mind, the thing that took Viktor Orban into power in Hungary was claiming that he was going to build a wall on the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees from the last time Vladimir Putin bombed a city into dust, Aleppo. So refugees coming into a country can flip the politics of that country. We saw that here in 2016. And that was with a few thousand Central Americans coming to the United States, a nation of 340 million people. But consider what's going on down, in Eastern Europe right now. Moldova, for example, it's a country that has 4 million people. They are on the Ukrainian border. They now are housing 360,000 refugees. 360,000 refugees in a country of 4 million people is the equivalent of 30 million, to use Trump's phrase, Mexicans invading America and actually getting here and setting up residence. 30 million. Can you imagine what American politics would look like if the caravans that came to the southern border in 2016 weren't just a few thousand people, but were 30 million people? That's what Moldova is dealing with right now, proportionally. Poland has 2.2 million Ukrainian refugees. They've got a population of 37 million. That's the equivalent of 21 million Mexicans or Central Americans making their way into the United States. And, no matter how model these folks may be, no matter how well-behaved these refugees may be, most of them don't speak the language of the country that they're in now. They don't speak Polish, for example. Some are going to be criminals, even if their crimes are petty crimes like, theft or prostitution to try to, just get food and things, survival. Some will take jobs from good Poles or good Moldovans. Others will burden the social welfare system. They all need to eat and find housing, which is going to cause food shortages and raise housing prices. And guess what? It's already hitting. The head of the Law and Justice Party, this right-wing party in Poland, Jarosław Kaczynski, said, quote, "Refugees will not abide by Polish law." The former Interior Minister, Joachim Brzezinski, said they are young, horny bulls that are just called refugees. And the president of Poland, who is kind of a Donald Trump character himself, Andrzej Duda, says they carry the risk of possible epidemics. Hello, Donald Trump. So, number one, refugees. Number two, worldwide shortages and spikes in the cost of both food and fuel. Oil prices are rising. Now, we're still in this 15% production cut that Trump negotiated in 2020 with Saudi Arabia and Russia, which jacked up the price of oil. It's still there. But on top of that, you've got the hit from the war. And the Republicans are already on this. I got an email yesterday afternoon from America First Policy Institute from Rick Perry, the former U.S. Energy Secretary. He says, if you don't notice, gas prices are way up. President Biden is trying to use Russia's actions in Ukraine as an excuse for an increase in costs. The truth is that these prices were inevitable because of the actions President Biden has taken since his first day in office. Under President Trump, we invested in American energy, which boosted our economy and let Americans pay as little as $2 a gallon for gas. Apparently, he forgot we had a pandemic and demand collapsed. The Biden administration reversed the policies that gave us energy independence, embraced the radical Green New Deal, and forced us to again rely on foreign oil. So here you got Rick Perry completely forgetting about the pandemic and lying through his teeth in large part. But again, using this spike in oil prices, which is the result of Russia's war against Ukraine, as a political weapon here in the United States. It's going to happen all over the world. Gideon Rachman in the Financial Times yesterday, he said in the UK, households could see a 50% increase in energy bills by next month in April, followed by another 50% rise in October. You think that's not going to turn into politics? And if Germany actually succeeds in cutting off, Russian oil, you're going to see price spikes that will probably go well above 150%. And you're going to see shortages of gasoline, diesel, home heating, gas. You're going to see serious shortages in Europe. Again, if you think that's not going to turn into something political, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. We saw this before. We saw this when climate change caused the deserts in northern Africa to move south about 100 miles back in 2010. Actually, the price, it hit a peak in 2010. And wheat production collapsed in North Africa. That sent farmers into Damascus where they were protesting and demanding, basically welfare. And Assad, shot them, which produced the civil war in Syria that led to the Russian bombing of Aleppo. And it also is why that street vendor in Tunisia set himself on fire, because of the increase in the price of wheat. He couldn't afford food. And that triggered the Arab Spring, which flipped Egypt from a democracy into a military dictatorship. And that was just a small increase in the price of wheat in one region. This is going to be worldwide. Russia and Ukraine account for 1/4 of the world's wheat exports. This is going to get bad. I'll continue on the other side of this break. Stay with me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. What are these crises and how will they be used politically? And by the way, let me just add to this. If you want proof that this is already baked into the Republicans' electoral plans, just check out the headlines right now. This over at the New York Post. The headline, Biden's inflation will doom Democrats in November. It's by Rich Lowry, who's a well-known conservative columnist. He says, elevated inflation represents a trifecta of doom for incumbent presidents. And by the way, he's right. It was inflation that took down Jerry Ford with his WIN program, Whip Inflation Now. If you're old enough, you remember those buttons that the Ford administration was passing out. And then Jimmy Carter came into office, and he still had high inflation, and that was one of the factors, along with Reagan, Bill Casey, Reagan's campaign manager, conspiring with the Iranians to hold the hostages until after the election in Iran. The so-called Iranian students holding American hostages at the U.S. embassy. But Carter had that inflation too. It typically takes, when you have a spike in inflation, we saw this after World War II, we saw this after the Civil War. We're seeing it right now. Well, and we saw it, after the Arab oil boycott of 1970, 73, I think? And then with the fall of the Shah in Iran in 1979 or 1980. We saw this every single time. We've seen the spike in inflation, and it takes about a decade to just kind of flush itself out of the economy. And typically the Fed runs in and says, oh yeah, we'll solve this problem by raising interest rates, and 9 out of 10 times they just produce a recession. But inflation continues because it takes a decade to flush inflation out of an economy. So anyhow, Rich Lowry is right about that. And he says it's coming, it's here. And he's talking about the 2020 election and how Republicans are going to use this. 2022, excuse me, this year's fall election, the elections this fall, and 2024, the presidential elections. He said, does it affect the lives of people in a discernible way that they will notice no matter what the president says? Yeah. Does it cut the pay of workers? Yes. Does it make the president seem powerless to control events? Again, Rich Lowry is absolutely right. And the Republicans are going to beat Democrats over the head with this. This is going to be their big thing. They're going to go at it. They're already doing it. They're literally already doing it. American Greatness website. The headline, Biden is unfit to lead in this perilous moment. The blue state conservative. The Biden crime family has been exposed. The black hole of depravity known as Hunter Biden's laptop. Oh, geez. And then America Out Loud, another one of the right-wing websites. Chile's economic destruction is a preview of what's in store for Biden's America. And they point out that America should cancel all payments to the UN for climate change programs, eliminate all climate regulations, and abolish all green taxes that are ruining our country. Right. So the Republicans are already all over this. They're already taking, the little inflation that we've got and trying to turn it into, oh my God, one huge, big deal. I'll finish the rant on the other side of this break. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Remember Paul Manafort? He used to be business partners with Roger Stone back in the day, working for Republican politicians like, Nixon and Reagan. Well, in 2004, he took a really sweet gig over in Ukraine, helping the Russians, President Putin, install Viktor Yanukovych as the president of Ukraine, a nice Putin puppet. That same year, though, the people of Ukraine said enough, and basically Yanukovych got driven out of the country. So they tried it again in 2010. Let's bring, this Putin puppet back into Ukraine, Yanukovych. And it worked until 2014 when they got kicked out. So he gets kicked out of Ukraine, Manafort. So what does he do the next year, 2015? He decides to run the Trump campaign. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Yeah, could be. Okay, there's an entire video that outlines this whole timeline over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So just to finish here, number one, we're looking at 3 levels of crisis that are coming as a result of the war in Ukraine that Republicans are already starting to use against Democrats, and they're going to go into hyperdrive soon. The first is immigration. Now, we're not seeing so much of that here in the United States. President Biden just said he'd bring in 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. That's probably not going to create a crisis, particularly since they're white people. And, typically the whole immigrant crisis thing is about white racist Americans complaining about brown-skinned people. But it is going to create a crisis in Eastern Europe and all across Europe, actually. The second is this food, fuel, and the Fed conspiring to crash the market. The Fed has raised interest rates 9 times in the last 75 years to try to control inflation. 8 out of those 9 times produced a recession and basically didn't control inflation. It takes about a decade to flush inflation out of an economy. It's just that simple. We saw this after World War II. We saw this after the Arab oil embargo of '73. We saw it after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, 1980. And we're seeing it now, post-COVID. As Paul Krugman said, in his op-ed yesterday in the Washington Post, wrong diagnosis, wrong prescription. But the Fed is going to produce a recession. Excuse me, that was Robert Reich who said that. Paul Krugman said, quote, policy and events are seriously putting the brakes on the rapid expansion the U.S. economy has experienced since the pandemic recession. Same thing. So we're going to see food shortages. As I mentioned before the break, Russia and Ukraine, between the two of them, produce 1/4 of the world's food exports. We're going to see fuel shortages, particularly in Europe, as they cut off Russian fuel. And you're going to see soaring inflation. And that's going to be used to take down democracies. This coming crisis of war, refugees, food, fuel, a dysfunctional Fed, and a worldwide pandemic. By the way, China just shut down Shanghai. We're going to see more supply chain issues. Remember that from November of last year? Indeed. We're going to start seeing shortages in our stores, too, in all probability, if they continue doing this. Now, I don't have any easy answers for this, but I do think that forewarned is forearmed. We have to know that this is coming, and particularly at the political level, Democrats need to be planning for this. Republicans already are. They're all over this right now. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Up next, that 7.5-hour gap and a crazy alert and your calls. Stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Brian J. Karam. It's titled Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. This is from the very last chapter, page 265. My father once told me that if you have a complaint, then you'd better have a solution. People bitch about everything, he routinely told me. They seem to like it more than solving problems. I've often thought about that as I spent a career covering the news. It is increasingly popular to merely ignore those things with which we don't agree and treat people the same way. That's hardly a solution. It only creates more problems. My pop also preached to me about adaptability, as did Alan, and that is a lesson I've tried to apply to every part of my life, to adapt. By the time Alan was preaching the same thing, it was a lesson I'd already learned, though it's still much appreciated. Today, the changing media landscape calls for adherence to some of our strictest tenets, while at the same time adapting to how we deliver the news to the public. Our democracy demands it. The local paper is perilously close to completely disappearing. Large swaths of this country live in news deserts. According to a study published by Axios in June 2021, the United States has lost some 37,000 newsroom jobs since 2016. And according to a study released on May 1st, 2021, by the University of North Carolina School of Media and Journalism, more than 1,300 communities across the United States have lost all news coverage. Among the findings in the study, about 20% of all metro and community newspapers in the United States, about 1,800, have gone out of business or merged since 2004, when about 9,000 were being published. Hundreds of more have scaled back coverage so much that they're becoming what researchers call ghost newspapers. Almost all of the newspapers still publishing have also scaled back, just less drastically. Online news sites, as well as some TV newsrooms and cable access channels, are working hard to keep local reporting alive, but these are taking root more slowly than newspapers are dying. Hence the 1,300 communities that have lost all local coverage. To adapt to this undeniable fact, we have to make newspapers more viable and easier to sustain. We cannot afford to let newsrooms disappear because they play a vital role in delivering information that the internet cannot reproduce. When you go to the internet, you're usually on a hard target searching for information. When you pick up a newspaper, you're scanning for information and are open to read anything presented to you. You may not know what to search for, but you know what you want to read when you find it. Newspapers are smorgasbords of information. The internet isn't and cannot be set up that way. So how do we save newspapers? There are a variety of business models currently under consideration. Nonprofits hold promise, but as of yet, we haven't gotten the needed solution or the needed traction. A big push was made to save the Baltimore Sun through a nonprofit, and this may indeed be the best way to save newspapers, since the job they do for society is completely incompatible with capitalism. Quote, "There's no question about it. I don't think any problem facing the country is more severe than what is facing our news information infrastructure," end quote, Michael Copps, formerly of the Federal Communications Commission, told me. Quote, "I saw it. First call I got was from the chairman when I joined the FCC was about the merger of Fox and Chris-Craft. That set the tone. I thought going to the FCC was the coolest job on earth. We'd be serving the public. And then I realized I spent a lot of time meeting with CEOs who wanted to seek approval of their mergers. The FCC more often than not approved the mergers. Then a rival would come in and gripe and say in order to compete, they had to have a merger too," end quote. The free market obviously isn't the answer. It only allows politics and information today to be played and reported on as sport. Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, and others saw it coming. This is a very steep mountain to climb, and there is no commercial solution to the problem. The corporate consolidation, as Copps told me, is too embedded in the system. How do you get beyond that? The government has to exercise its antitrust laws, and we need to think about public media. Put the brakes on corporate mergers. Subsidies are the key, Victor Picard, the University of Pennsylvania communications professor, explained to me. He works at the intersections of U.S. and global media activities and politics, the history and political economy of media institutions, and the normative foundations of media policy. Quote, "It's the commercialization, the dedication to clickbait, and profits above all else. That's what's driving this. There's no commercial incentive to do it right. Journalism often isn't sexy," end quote, he said. While there isn't one perfect model, Picard said he could see subsidized subscribers or a voucher plan. Everybody gets a $100 voucher and they can buy media of their choice. It guarantees a certain method of support. subsidize the news outlets themselves. My preference is to radically expand and reform our public broadcast system so that they can actually be politically independent." End quote. Pickard also supports public media centers in every city across the country, public libraries, schools, and journalism schools. That's my radical plan. It's healthy to have a mixed system: independents, nonprofits, public benefit corporations, and standards for for-profit companies. The driving force today in journalism is capitalism, and it's driving our journalism into the ground. The book is Free the Press: The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. I'll pick up your calls in just a second, but just a couple of other questions here and stories for you. We have this 7.5-hour gap. Rosemary Woods and Richard Nixon, that was 18 minutes, wasn't it, as I recall? This is 7.5 hours. And we know that Trump was making phone calls during that time because we have the testimony of people talking about it. He called Mike Pence. He called Kevin McCarthy. People were standing around Kevin McCarthy when he put Trump on speakerphone, for example. So either one of two things is happening. Either Trump had whoever keeps those logs of the White House calls, the White House call logs, either he had them and he kicked them out of the White House, or had them stop recording or keeping track of what's going on, or had them, purge the data. So either it was an explicit cover-up. He knew he was going to go into criminal activity mode and he wanted no record of it. Either that's what happened, or he was using burner phones or somebody else's phones, which also would indicate that he had knowledge that he was engaging in a criminal act, trying to overthrow the United States, defraud all of us of our right to have the president that we elected. So how is it that the Republicans keep pretending that everything's just fine? Donald Trump, he's still our hero. I mean, this is nuts. Jamie Gangel reported for CNN, quote, according to multiple sources formerly in the administration, the ex-president often used other people's phones or multiple phones to communicate with his supporters and even family. One former staffer blamed the president's habit on an aversion to anyone listening to his calls. Right. And of course, you know what he could have been doing during that during that 7.5 hours. He could have been calling the Department of Defense and saying, hey, get in there with the National Guard and stop this thing. He wasn't. He could have been calling the Capitol Police and saying, how are you guys doing? Do you need some help? He didn't. He could have been calling the D.C. police, another police agency, that was right there, saying, I've authorized you to go into the Capitol. Typically, they're not. Go, stop this. Save these, they're trying to kill Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. Stop them. He didn't. He could have called on the mayor of Washington, D.C. and said, hey, you control the National Guard in D.C. Go show up and do something about, this insurrection. He didn't. He did none of those things. Instead, what did he do? He sat in front of his TV, gleefully watching the insurrection happening, watching people being killed, including police officers. Which raises these two questions. Number one, did he know in advance that this is how it was going to play out? Was that his hope? And number two, did he participate in a conspiracy to make this the way it turned out? I think it's fairly obvious that the answer to both those questions is yes. So, when it came out that this 7.5 hour gap and somebody suggested, well, maybe Trump was using burner phones, Trump came out and made a public statement. I don't even know what a burner phone is, he said. Never heard the phrase before. So John Bolton, his national security advisor, told CBS News yesterday that he heard former president use the phrase burner phones in several discussions. Right. We all know what's going on here. John Bolton and Donald Trump, and we all know what's going on. A criminal ran the United States for 4 years and wants to run the United States again. And a criminally inclined Republican Party was just fine with it, is just fine with it, and wants to continue being just fine with it. Finally, our crazy alert in a few years, very few years. It's 2022 right now. They're talking about 2027, 5 years from now. You will be able to stay in a hotel in outer space if you're a billionaire. Obviously all these things. The billionaires, they've got so much extra money now because taxes are so low. They're shooting themselves into outer space. Hey, why not have a destination? Why just go up and come back down? This company, Orbital Assembly Corporation, is building a space station. They're calling it the Voyager Station. It'll have 24 modules connected by elevator shafts to a rotating wheel that spins around, producing simulated gravity along the outside, just like in the movies. And they say, because of the weightlessness and the reduced gravity, you'll be able to jump higher, be able to lift things, and be able to run in ways that you can't on Earth. They say they eventually want to make the hotel similar to a trip to Disneyland, only just for, morbidly rich people. Brilliant. Okay. Picking up your phone calls on all these things that I've laid on the table here for you. Steve in Lake Elsinore, California. Hey, Steve, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Tom, I'd like to compliment you on today's rant. I'm using this word as a compliment. You are Cassandra. You are predicting the future. And it's so scary that everything that you just said today is going to happen, and we are basically helpless to prevent it. I don't know if you've ever read Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, but he basically postulates that the collapse of civilizations were caused by climate change, supply interruptions, and environmental degradation, the overuse of the land.
And the occasional pandemic, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? We are very much headed that way. So, and what the story about Cassandra was, she had the ability to foretell the future, but nobody would believe her. The gods gave her this power, and then, of course, they wanted to make it a joke out of it. And
yeah, that's the irony about Cassandra. People think when you say somebody's being a Cassandra that they're being wrong. Cassandra was always right. It's just that she was never believed. I think some people will believe me, but thank you, Steve. Thanks for your kind comments. I stand behind everything I said. These three big things that are coming. Have food and fuel shocks. The problem of I was going to say immigrants, refugees, a refugee crisis, and a worldwide recession that may be a depression, because they're already starting to happen. I mean, it doesn't take
one more thing I'd like to add, Tom. As you may know, World War II, one of the main leading factors going to it was the migration of Jews from Russia and Eastern Europe into Western Europe, and then, of course, that led to the
right back around the 1917, right around the Revolution. Yeah.
Yes. So
yeah, absolutely.
Very, very scary. Then you're right.
yeah, very good point, Steve. Thank you very much for the call. Jamie in Chicago. Hey, Jamie, what's up?
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Love listening to your show.
Thank you.
I think you have a very important duty that you do for everybody.
Thank you.
I wanted to add or reiterate what you're saying about the food and energy shortages. This is sort of a problem that has been exacerbated over the years. You also always mention Jimmy Carter wanting to switch to solar.
Mm-hmm.
And just like any investor, you diversify your portfolio if not to take risks. Unregulated capitalism propagates greed. And what we've done is created policy to subsidize just a few industries, oil, corn, and soy. We used to be sort of a cornucopia of a food source in this country, and now we grow two products because it's a staple that we can sell around the world.
Right.
We eat too much meat. We got to feed cattle corn, pigs corn, so we don't grow anything else. And now we're at a drastic point, but we have to go solar to save the environment. We have to do other things for the environment, grow different things to save the environment. But there's still time to sort of have a diversified portfolio where we can still use oil at a certain, moderate use, but start moving to alternative sources of energy. And we have to do it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think we also have to reinvent our agriculture as well. And I'm with you. I mean, the mind-boggling amount of water and fossil fuel that goes into producing, for example, meat, meat and dairy and eggs and chickens and stuff is mind-boggling. I mean, it's an order of magnitude greater than producing vegetables. And worldwide adoption of something close to vegetarianism would be a really healthy thing, and not literally healthy, but also for the planet as well. And so fixing our agriculture, fixing our energy usage, shifting to solar, electrifying our transportation systems, all these things are possible, Jamie. You're absolutely right. We just have to have the will and the enthusiasm. We need to stop subsidizing the opposite of these things.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
We subsidize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $600 billion a decade, and we're subsidizing the growth of these feedstocks for animals like soybeans. And welcome back. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I had a couple points. I kind of wanted to inject a thought on the Ukrainian refugees, and then I had a question for you. Basically, if you look at it, this is what I posted on my Facebook page here a couple of days ago, is what Putin is doing, economic sanctions against him aside, is this a corporate move? In other words, he goes in there to try to grab land and the ag base and the energy base of Ukraine. In other words, the 5 atomic nuclear reactors or
15
power plants.
Yeah.
And he goes in there and grabs this land, and then all the people, the refugees, end up in Europe, or the majority of them in Europe, like Moldova. That point there that you made, the ratio. He had an idea of internalizing all these assets and profits to himself and externalizing all the liabilities on the free countries.
You're absolutely right. He's doing the same thing that the giant American corporations do.
Yeah. So the point is that with these sanctions, we have to defeat him, either by regime change or sensibility. Don't call it regime change. They need a sensible policy to get along with the world. If they want to be part of the market, then they have to act like it. And Putin's got to go. We cannot tolerate. So no matter what, and that's a scary synopsis that you gave earlier. We have to. Hopefully, the strength is in this country to withstand it and to think our way through it.
Yeah.
The other point was.
Well, okay, go ahead, Ray.
Go ahead. No,
I was going to say the problem is the best way to deal with Putin is for his own countrymen and women to deal with him, for his own people to take him down.
Correct.
But the problem is he's got like 70 or 80% popularity in Russia. And people are, what just boggles my mind, Randy, is I turn on the TV and I see these pundits going, how can Russians not realize what a terrible war Putin is doing? And I'm yelling back at them, how did Americans not realize what George W. Bush was doing in Iraq in 2003? I mean, it took 5 years before Americans turned against the war in Iraq, before they figured it out. You expect the Russians to figure out that they've been lied to in a week?
It didn't take me that long.
No, it didn't take me either. I mean, we were all opposed to it right from the get-go. But I'm talking about majority public opinion, large enough majority public opinion to actually change the outcome of a government.
You are right. And the other question was, who's the billionaire money behind the America's First lobby group?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't.
Okay. That was it. Hey, have a great show, and thank you. You wised me up way before the rest of them on Bush. I was against him from
Well, that's
when
why
he
I started
borrowing
this
money
show.
for tax cuts.
That's why I started this show in 2003, was because of the war. The war in Iraq. It was like, okay, we've had enough. This guy is using 9/11 to pass dictator-style laws like the Patriot Act, and now he's doing that's the first thing that Hitler did. Now he's doing the second thing Hitler did, which is, invading a non-combatant country. And Hitler, there was a series of. Go ahead.
I think it was 2003 when I subscribed, and then when you left Air America, I followed you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Randy.
I love you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Love you, too. Great to hear from you. It is 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, Susan Collins just came out and said that she's going to vote for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And this is like a good thing. It means no matter what. Well, Joe Manchin has said he's going to vote for her. We don't know about what's her name from Arizona, but regardless, it doesn't matter because now we've got at least one Republican on board, and I'm guessing there'll be a couple more. I'd be surprised if Mitt Romney didn't vote for it, but we'll see. I mean, they've done such an amazing job of smearing her. We'll see where it goes. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, it's always funny when they find one Republican and they call it bipartisan.
Yeah.
But and the other thing is, I'd rather be floating in the Caribbean than to be in a hamster tube in space. It's much better weight.
Well, I think it'd be fascinating, but I'm not. I can't afford it, so it's not. It's not something I'm going to dream about.
Disney has better rides than that.
Yeah. Safer.
What I'm calling about. Oh, yeah. I don't understand why there's not, maybe there is some international refugee insurance program that everybody pays into that can help out the host countries who are taking in these people so that they're compensated. And you can either pay into it or take refugees. I don't want to sound like I'm commoditizing.
Well, there is a UN refugee agency. I believe it's UNHCR. But it doesn't. It's not as fully formed as what you're suggesting, Bill. I think that's a brilliant suggestion. And then the dues, by the way, that the UN could charge every member nation every year would go up or down. The insurance costs would go up or down based on the probability of war producing refugees or climate change producing refugees.
Right. I mean, it could be done social security model or something.
Right. But, that's a really great idea, Bill.
These countries should be made whole for doing God's work, I think.
Yeah, and humanity's work, frankly. I mean, it's this is all of us. I'm with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Bill. Great to hear from you. David in Germantown, Tennessee. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Hey, I've been listening to you for a while, and I was just surprised that the space travel thing, you don't like it. I mean, I'm a liberal in Tennessee, and my friends and I, man, we're super excited about it.
I think it's kind of cool that it's happening. What I think is unfortunate is that you're not going to be able to make use of it unless you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, I mean, cars were just for the rich, too, at one point, and flat-screen TVs. I mean, it's just a stepping stone to get us off this planet.
Could be.
It's
Could
really,
be, David.
Yeah, I mean,
you might be right.
Boldly go with, pretty sure I am right, but yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll back away from making fun of it. Thank you, David. Fair in Stoddard, New Hampshire. Hey, Fair, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Well, I'm still reading your rant for the day, but I really agree with it. And in light of the consequences of this war dragging on, I think it's worth the chance to give Ukraine the planes to end this war And we've got nukes. Russia has nukes. They should be just as afraid of us as we are of them.
I agree. I've been saying those Polish planes should have gone to Ukraine, weeks ago when Poland first offered them. And Poland isn't the only country that has them, by the way. Romania has some. There's a couple of other countries that have them, and they have indicated a willingness to transfer them to Ukraine as well.
And if they can end the war, it could end the crisis quickly, and Putin will lose. And we can go back. Maybe all these consequences that you're talking about won't be as bad.
Well, I think all we can do now is ameliorate them slightly. I mean, we already have, roughly 5 million refugees have left the country. The estimate is that, within the next few weeks, as they're now opening humanitarian corridors, there'll be 10 million, out of 44 million Ukrainians, 10 million of them will be outside the country. And another 10 million of them will be displaced within the country. I mean, that's mind-boggling. You can't dial back the impact of that.
They should be putting those people to work, learn building skills.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to, rebuilding Ukraine is going to be.
They can rebuild the country.
Yeah, it's going to require an effort that's going to make the Marshall Plan. Well, it's going to have to imitate essentially the Marshall Plan. We helped. We didn't so much help. We funded the rebuilding of Germany and France and whatnot. The rest of Europe after World War II. And this is going to take the same thing. Fair, thank you. Very, very well said. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, you wanted to get back to Trump and his little follies this week?
Am I not allowed to give you a traditional greeting, Mr. Hartmann? Buenos dias, mi amigo.
Buenos dias.
He walks again by night. Hey, listen, you're absolutely right. Trump did say when he was getting elected that he didn't want to allow rapists and murderers into the country, right?
Yeah.
But as you pointed out a few minutes ago, he was the cause of police getting murdered at the Capitol. I submit to you that Trump is the rapist and murderer.
Yeah, he's got 20 women, charging him with sexual assault, and you've got, I think they're up to like 6 or 7 deaths now, directly that are the direct consequences of what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. And
God knows how many lives he's destroyed for those that he said he was going to join at the Capitol, and then he left them in the dust.
Yeah, I'm with you. Chaz, thank you. Well said. Robert in Minneapolis. Robert, you wanted to revisit the space issue.
Yeah, I saw maybe a couple months ago that the pollution that comes out of the rockets that they use for this Elon Musk type of operation is huge compared to the pollution that is given out by the Russian mixture of fuel. And no one is saying anything about it. I've heard that it is equivalent. One shot from the Musk people is equivalent to 450,000 automobile exhausts in a year.
Wow!
Now, I can't reference that exactly, but
I've seen numbers similar to that at various places. I mean, this is an argument that has gone back to the '60s, frankly, to NASA. We're producing massive pollution. There are one way around that is to use hydrogen.
Right. Yeah, hydrogen and oxygen.
Right, but a lot of them are not using hydrogen and oxygen. They're using solid fuel propellants or even some liquid fuels that are basically derived from hydrocarbons.
And the news media seems to be doing nothing but celebrating how wonderful it is that these billionaires get to go and have a few minutes in space where they can feel elated that they can float around.
Yeah.
Good grief.
It's interesting. Okay, so we're hearing all sides of the space argument, too. Fascinating. Robert, thank you. Actually, very good points. So coming up next, Professor Richard Wolff. Will the Russian Ruble oil scheme work? And then after that, Koch and Trump refuse to stop doing business in Russia. And I've got a geeky science for you, and I'll pick up your phone calls, so stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on the birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff is the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books, including The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Democracyatwork.info is the website, and you can see him on Twitter at Prof. Wolff, P-R-O-F-W-O-L-F-F. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great to have you with us. So Russia has come out now. Putin, his government has come out and said that, we're going to continue selling oil in world markets, even if we can't accept dollars because we can't clear them through our banks. But you're going to have to start paying us in rubles. I'm curious what this means, what impact this could have. And maybe we should even start at the beginning. Why are oil sales all around the world typically denominated in dollars? Or for that matter, what does the dollar being the world's reserve currency even mean? And what might this crisis with Russia, if you want to call it, if it's probably not quite the right word, how might that change the global order of things?
All right, let's go quickly through it. The reason the dollar is the world currency is the same as the reason that the dollar is used to settle most global transactions that involve buying or selling oil or petroleum products. And that's because the United States, since the end of World War II, if not even earlier, has been the overwhelmingly dominant economy in the world. The potential competitors, Britain, Germany, Japan, were all wiped out in World Wars I or II, or both of them, and it left the United States the only one standing. Now, anyone who understands human history knows that couldn't have lasted for very long because of the peculiar way it happened and because every empire in the past disappeared sooner or later. But, you know, the people who are living in one tend to believe it'll last forever. And so the world became accustomed in the decades after 1945 to doing most anything in dollars. There were even countries whose local currency was pushed out, and they began to use dollars even though they were a completely different country. And that has continued until recent years, and it's very, very important. In recent years, it has been understood by the rest of the world that using dollars gives an enormous subsidy to the United States. Basically, think of it this way. Normally, a country like us buys things from the rest of the world and sends them dollars, and then they turn around and use the dollars to buy things produced here in the United States. So workers produce wealth over there and exchange it, in effect, for wealth produced here, which we ship over there. Imagine then a system like the last 75 years where they send us, you know, French wine or iron ore from Australia or whatever, and all we send them is costless little green pieces of paper that say U.S. currency. That's a fantastic arrangement. We give nothing, and the world's wealth flows to this country. It's part of why we were able to enjoy higher standards of living than virtually anywhere else. It was bound to come to an end eventually. And what we're seeing in the world over the last 15 years is it's now coming into its own. First of all, and most important, the rise of China, which now has an enormous economic footprint in the world, and its currency is becoming so important to so many countries on so many different transactions that they're starting to hold the yuan, the Chinese currency, in the way they used to hold the dollar. So instead of holding, say, a 75% dollars and 25% euros, the other big currency, they are now reshuffling and beginning to keep yuan because they need them for international transactions. And so the Chinese get a subsidy. And the Russians, allied with the Chinese, are smiling as they say to us, okay, you want to hit us with sanctions? We'll hit you with some. We'll demand payment for oil and gas, upon which many European countries depend. You'll have to pay us in rubles. You'll have to go and get that ruble by giving us dollars and euros, because we won't give you the rubles otherwise. And you have to get the rubles, and then you send them to us back to pay for the oil and the gas. And that means more and more global business will be conducted by a network of yuan from China, rubles from Russia, and then as other countries participate, and here particularly Iran and India, what you're beginning to do, which we could have foretold, is develop a second alternative global system. The United States' period of being at the top of the heap all by itself is coming to an end. And between you and me, Tom, that's really what this Ukraine war is all about. It's a disaster, of course, for the people there, but it's actually a footnote to this tectonic shift in the world economy as the footprint of the U.S. shrinks with corresponding problems at home, and the economic footprint of China, Russia, Iran, and India begin to emerge in the way we could have said 20 years ago was bound to happen, but now we're actually seeing it no longer in slow motion, but happening fast.
So the dollar dominance around the world after World War II came out of, in large part, and please correct me if my understanding of this is wrong, came out of the Bretton Woods agreements that they had in 1944, as I recall. In fact, it was even before the war was over. They were organizing this. And feel free to fill us all in on what that means, but does that mean that we need to have another international conference like Bretton Woods to kind of nail something down, or does it mean that just by virtue of market pressure, China is approaching GDP of the United States, and they got 3 times, 4 times our population. They're eventually going. Their middle class is larger than our entire population. They're going to get there, and they're going to get there fairly soon. Is it just going to organically happen?
Well, the Bretton Woods, you're quite right. That's when it was done. The American leader there, Harry Dexter White, met with his corresponding leader from England, because only the victors really got together from the war to make the arrangements. The British fellow who really dominated was actually John Maynard Keynes, and he brought his brilliance and his economics together with Dexter White's, and they crafted this global system. The British made an attempt to get the British pound involved, but because Britain was so much smaller than the United States by then, they really couldn't do it. And by default, the United States dollar became the global currency for the next 75 years. And the subsidy we got was enormous from that. Everybody in the world who holds dollars for whatever reason either holds them in cash or, and here you enjoy this irony, lends it back to the United States government, because that's a way of holding a dollar asset that pays you an interest, because the U.S. government has to pay interest on its borrowings. So you have a dollar and you have interest, which means the United States has to send tens of billions of dollars abroad every year to pay interest. And just so you get the irony here, it means the United States is currently sending tens of billions of dollars every year to the People's Republic of China, because it is one of the second largest after Japan, holder of U.S. treasuries, because it has lent the dollars we send there for everything the Chinese send us and lent it back to the government. Ironically, the Chinese loans to the U.S. government help it to send military to Ukraine, even though China is on the other side with Russia. It shows you that you have to keep separate in your mind the political rhetoric, the flag waving, and all of that tough talk from the underlying economic reality. And it's crystal clear that it's that reality, the rise of China and the relative decline of the United States, that's going to call the shots, and that these little skirmishes, horrible as they are for the people involved, like in the Ukraine, are footnotes to this shift in the world, which Americans have taken a long time to come to terms with, and indeed most Americans still don't want to face.
Professor, well, we have a minute and a half here before we hit a hard break I can't control. England was kind of in the catbird seat at the beginning of World War I, if my recollection is correct, and the English Empire after World War I basically dissolved. Right. And they ceased having a worldwide military. I mean, they still, to some extent, but basically they turned that over to us. Do you see a similar dissolution of America's military role along with our economic role?
Yeah, you can't sustain your military if you're divided at home, as we already are, if you are neglecting your own infrastructure, as we openly admit we have, if you're squeezing the lower 2/3 of your people with levels of economic distress, which we are now doing, it's like a script we're following. We're imploding eventually because we have not developed the foundation economically and politically to play this global role. That's what always happens. The empire overreaches relative to its home base, and then the whole thing falls apart. The irony is, we're all talking about how Russia may fall apart, and that may happen. But what we really ought to be doing is facing all of the factors that suggest we in the U.S. are going to have that problem and are already in the early stages of it. And we need now a conference like Bretton Woods, but with the Russians and the Chinese who have to be there in order to avoid a military catastrophe and try to accommodate the shift rather than pretend we can overwhelm it.
Fascinating, fascinating. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, the website, rdwolff with 2fs.com as well, and Prof. Wolff with 2fs on Twitter. Dr. Wolff, thank you. It's always great talking with you.
Good to talk to you too, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll be back. I've got a geeky science about cryptocurrency, and Koch Industries wants to stay in Russia. What's up with that?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Yes, there are still some of us left here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. And Bill in Seattle. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was calling about the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I was just curious why the media and why nobody's actually talking about people of color being arrested and put in detention centers.
You're talking about the African students in Ukraine who were trying to get into Poland and they were stopped at the border?
Well, wait, though. Poland has put them in detention centers, and so has Belarus. And so have some of those other countries right there on the border.
By detention centers, you mean refugee centers? Or are you saying that people were arrested because they were black?
Well, my relatives, I have a couple of relatives there.
Uh-huh.
They're in jail. In jail.
Whoa.
The detention centers are actually jails. And I'm trying to figure out why they're arresting them. They haven't done anything.
Yeah. Bill, I'm sorry. I don't know any of the details about what you're talking about. I do know that, you know, the people of color were being singled out for a few days there. It got a lot of outraged publicity in the United States. That got back to Poland. Poland stopped doing that, to the best of my knowledge. And it not only looked bad, it was bad. But I didn't know about putting people in jail. I'll have to keep an eye out for that. Bill, thank you for the heads up on it. George in Palm Desert, California. Hey, George, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Tom. Anyway, I'm out here in Coachella Valley, and we are in a terrible drought here in California, as you well know, and 80% of our water goes to agriculture, and it takes 4 gallons of water to make 1 pound of almonds. However, here in the valley, which is in the Sonoran Mojave Desert, they are planning 4 water parks, including a 386-acre surf park, and Disney is going to build a community on 618 acres with a huge lake in it. Most of the statistics show that this is going to cost at least 55 million gallons a year in evaporation alone. This water is all coming from our aquifer, too. Most people, anyway, environmentalists, we're against it, but it looks like this is all going to happen, and it's because of development, and the rich developers are going to get their way with all the city councils. So,
wow,
looks bad.
Wow, is the aquifer in trouble?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's. I mean, we're in a drought. We're on restrictions here. Boy, if you use too much money, too much water in your house, you're going to get an extra bill for it.
Yeah. And
you're not allowed to wash your car and wash down your driveway and things like that. But we're going to build 4 water parks, and Disney's going to build 618 residents here. And by the way, the community that Disney's going to build is going to be Disney themed. I mean, I don't know about that, but anyway.
Shades of tacky movies from the 80s, you know.
Yeah. it just doesn't look good. Are you aware of the Dark Mountain Project?
No, I'm not.
Anyway, it's a real bad outlook. We are going to, and I think you've mentioned this, we are destined to be the 6th major extinction.
Yeah, well, I think we're in the early stages of it, and that opinion is obviously not unique to me. George, thank you. Thanks for the heads up. I had no idea. Wow, 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in 60 seconds and get into Koch Industries and geeky science. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. You know, they often say that Republican Senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, is the stupidest guy in the entire United States Senate. I get it. Tommy Tuberville gives him a run for his money, but he just came out with what has to be at least the very stupidest idea of the year. Ron Johnson is proposing, there's a shortage of child care workers right now in America. There's a whole bunch of good reasons for that. But he has proposed a solution. His suggestion, any woman in America who's getting any kind of public assistance, you're getting food stamps, you're getting, tuition relief, whatever it may be, you would be forced to go into daycare centers and care for children. Yeah, seriously. This is Ron Johnson's idea. People who had no training, and one of his assistants said, well, it's just like teachers who teach in public schools where their own kids attend. No, it's not. These are not trained professionals. There's no union. This is nuts. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. So companies are fleeing Russia. Over 450 multinational companies have withdrawn from Russia in some form, according to the Yale School of Management. There's a professor there, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, who has been compiling a list for the Yale School of Management of who's leaving. And, some of them, he says, have been not as, well, he calls them smoke screens. He says Nestle, and Subway and Hilton and Hyatt. They're pulling out, but they're not quite pulling out. But at least they made a symbolic gesture. But Sonnenfeld's got his lowest category, and this is corporations that are not only not pulling out and not only not giving lip service to pulling out, but they're actually digging in and saying, yes, we're going to stay here in Russia. Screw you, world. And he says only 8 U.S. companies have that dubious distinction. And 7 of those companies you've never heard of, so I'm not going to list them here. You wouldn't recognize any of their names. They're obscure companies. But the 8th is Koch Industries, yes. The maker of Brawny paper towels, Dixie cups. They're apparently going to stay in Russia and keep funding the Russian war machine. The Mardi Gras and Vanity Fair napkins, Quilted Northern and Angel Soft, Brawny and Sparkle, Georgia Pacific Office Products, Cordura products. This is all from Dana Milbank's piece in today's Washington Post, by the way, if you want to see the article and the link. The Koch Industries said, well, we're staying here to, here's the quote, we will not walk away from our employees there or hand over these manufacturing facilities to the Russian government. And the guy from Yale School of Management, Sonnenfeld, he says that's absolutely ludicrous, arrogant, and tortured logic. It's such tortured logic, it's beyond absurd. And at the same time, by the way, groups in the United States funded by Koch Industries or the Koch brothers or Koch, whatever, are arguing against sanctions imposed by Russia or imposed on Russia by the United States. Dan Caldwell, the vice president for foreign policy at Stand Together, this is one of the umbrella groups of the Koch network, said the Stand Together community believes that broad-based economic sanctions rarely achieve their desired policy outcomes. And then you hear similar criticisms coming from other Koch groups, the American Institute for Economic Research, Defense Priorities, and Concerned Veterans for America, all groups with Koch ties, according to Dana Milbank. Not to mention the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, which has been pushing voter restrictions in state after state, and Stand Together, another one of these Koch groups. It's a fascinating piece that Dana Milbank has in today's Washington Post. I commend it to you. We will be back, and on the other side of the break, well, I'll tell you in just a second.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the cryptocurrency fossil fuel connection exposed in Geeky Science on the other side of the break, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Tyranny, From Plato to Trump, Fools, Sycophants, and Citizens by Andrew Fiala. This is from the preface. It starts out with a quote from Mary Wollstonecraft from her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Quote, tyrants would have cause to tremble if reason were to become the rule of duty. We recently witnessed the failure of a would-be tyrant who attempted to subvert the rule of law and overturn the result of a democratic election. The American system was pushed toward a cliff, but constitutional guardrails slowed things down. Conscientious people pumped the brakes, and the system held. This was a lesson of tyranny averted. We should take stock and learn what worked and what needs improvement in our system and in our souls. And while the American crisis of 2020-2021 was frightening, a broader historical perspective helps. The threat of tyranny is common, but the cure is well known. It involves virtuous citizenship and a stable constitution. The tyrant's rise and fall is an old story. Consider, a plague descended on the nation as the tyrant ranted and raved, refusing to admit that he was the cause of the nation's ills. The tyrant lived in a fantasy world of his own creation. He refused to accept what was said by those who spoke truth to power. Instead, he listened only to those who flattered his ego and encouraged him in his delusions. The nation suffered profoundly under the tyrant and his plague. He tried to blame the plague on some other scapegoat. Members of the public were seduced by the tyrant and his sycophants to sacrifice everything on behalf of a lie. Violence erupted. When the awful truth was finally revealed, the chorus reached a tragic conclusion. Our lives were mere shadows, and then there's a block of poetry here. Our lives were mere shadows, happiness fades away to nothing. The tyrant's fall reminds us that no human creation lasts forever. Plague and trouble make victims of us all. This is from Oedipus, the Tyrant, lines 1190. This is the story of Oedipus. It is also the story of Donald Trump. The players in this tragedy are found throughout history. They are the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic masses. The tyrant rages, the sycophants simper, the masses cheer and howl, fight and die. As the plague spreads, good things fall apart and decency suffers. This tragedy brings with it the risk of despair. The good news is that the cure for this disease is well known. It is, as Mary Wollstonecraft suggested, reason. Life in general must be made reasonable. This means we need a reasonable constitution as well as wise and virtuous citizens. Wisdom and virtue work together to prevent tyranny. Plato and Aristotle knew this, as did John Adams. Adams wrote in his diary when he was Vice President of the United States, quote, tyranny can scarcely be practiced upon a virtuous and wise people. But wisdom, virtue, and reason are often lacking. Wollstonecraft, I've got my Marys wrong. This is Wollstonecraft, I'm sorry. Wollstonecraft laments the fact that, quote, tyranny in whatever part of society it rears its brazen front will ever undermine morality. Tyranny is not only a political problem, it is also a moral and spiritual one. It afflicts our souls as well as churches, businesses, and family life. Wollstonecraft's important contribution was to argue that for the liberation of women in an era when women were oppressed by the tyranny of patriarchal families. Wollstonecraft was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson and other thinkers of the 18th century Enlightenment. Despite their claims to enlightenment, the heroes of this tradition suffered from moral blindness, as we all do. Jefferson's words inspired a revolution against the tyrant King George III. The words inscribed in the Jefferson Memorial state, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." But Jefferson owned slaves, one of the more obvious forms of tyranny in the world. We must all be careful of our blind spots. Reason aims to shed light by holding up a mirror. The remedy for tyranny is philosophical self-examination. This is an ongoing process, not a panacea. Each generation must seek to make progress on their path to enlightenment. The good news is that we have made progress. Women were liberated and slavery was abolished. The idea that wisdom and virtue can cure tyranny predates the Enlightenment by over 2,000 years. It was the solution proposed by the ancient Greeks, who gave us the very language we will employ here. Words such as tyranny, sycophancy, democracy, and political philosophy. The Greeks emphasized the need for virtue among the players in the political drama. Modern thinkers built upon this and emphasized the need for a rational system of government that prevents tyranny. Tragedy is avoided when leaders and citizens are virtuous and when a stable constitutional system guarantees individual rights, divides power, and creates checks and balances. We have known the cure for thousands of years, but the disease is genetic. Every generation or so, the conditions conspire to bring together an ugly cast of characters that includes the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic fools who cheer him on. The book, Tyranny from Plato to Trump, by Andrew Fiala. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. So crypto mining is the latest fossil fuel scam. This is amazing. A lot of these oil operations around the world, literally around the world, from North Dakota to Saudi Arabia, one of the byproducts of drilling oil is that some gas comes up with it. And traditionally what they do is what's called flaring that gas. Sometimes it's in large enough quantities that they capture it and sell it, but typically they just burn it. And so what some of these oil companies have been doing through a company called Crusoe Energy Systems is they're taking that flared gas, they're using it to run generators. The generators are driving computers, and the computers are mining Bitcoin. So they're converting flared gas, which would have been waste, into Bitcoin. And, this sounds like a wacky idea. Well, ExxonMobil is doing it right now in North Dakota, along with Crusoe Energy Systems. This is the company that runs the Bitcoin mining operations. This company is doing the same thing with an oil drilling company in Norway, with a company in Canada, Enerplus, with a company in Oklahoma, or based out of Oklahoma City, Devon Energy. This is all from reports from CNBC. And that ExxonMobil may even expand its crypto mining partnership into operations in Alaska, Nigeria, Guyana, and Germany. Crusoe President Cully Cavanis told CNBC, quote, more than 10 million cubic feet of gas per day that would have been flared is not flared because we've deployed our systems. So they're converting it into cryptocurrency, which raises some interesting questions like, are cryptocurrencies the new tulip bulbs, the Dutch tulip bulbs? Are they simply a conversion of energy into money? And as long as it's cheaper to convert the energy into money, the cryptocurrency continues to go up. But is there a point at which it becomes more expensive to convert that energy into cryptocurrency? I call it money. I probably shouldn't. The Natural Resources Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, by the way, was trying to learn about this, what's going on, and among other things. And so they asked fossil fuel executives to testify. This is Raul Grijalva is the chair of the committee. And companies, EOG Resources, Devon Energy, Occidental Petroleum, they all said, no, we'll pass. We're not going to show up and talk to Congress. So Grijalva says that the hearings have been canceled. He said, their silence tells us all we need to know, that cries for more drilling and looser regulations are nothing more than an age-old attempt to line their own pockets. Our geeky science for the day. So, picking up your phone calls, and Frank in Staten Island, New York. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm kind of disillusioned with the news in general. I mean, you watch 10 minutes of the C-SPAN and your head explodes. I feel like sending an email to Marsha Blackburn asking if she could define clown show. I mean, why do networks like CNN and Fox do the opposite stories? Like, I was in the car listening to you one day, and I switched to channels, and I passed through Fox, and they're yelling and screaming about Hunter Biden's laptop.
Right.
Why doesn't CNN do something about that and say it's legitimate or not and put the story to rest? I mean, and the other thing that really irritates me is this whole thing about whataboutism. Clarence Thomas's wife is a problem, and then someone says, well, what about this? You know, they always try to answer your question. They never answer your question. They just pose another question, and you get nowhere. Yeah. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is very sad. I'm just tuning out of everything.
I get what you're saying, Frank. By the way, with regard to Hunter Biden, there has been a federal investigation into him since 2018 during the Trump administration. Right. And it's being led by a federal prosecutor, a U.S. attorney out of Delaware. And he's still running that investigation. And I don't know about the laptop and the blind computer repair guy who got it and all that. I mean, there's some just bizarre stuff there. But the question of whether Hunter Biden took that seat on the board of that Ukrainian energy company, whether it was an attempt to influence Biden or whether it was some kind of payola or whatever, I think Americans have a right to know.
Yes.
Let's just close the thing down. I mean, or not shut down the investigation, but let's bring it to a resolution.
But I think the silver lining with that investigation, just like Barr got the report from Mueller, our new guy is going to get the report from Durham, and it's his prerogative to release it or not. So,
no, this isn't Durham. This isn't Durham. This is a separate investigation. Durham is looking into the origins of the Russia probe or whatever. He's looking into, or was supposed to be looking into, why is it that the Congress and the DOJ and everybody else in the first place started looking into Trump's associations with Russia, the Steele dossier and all that kind of stuff. This is a federal prosecutor in Delaware who's actually specifically looking into Hunter Biden and whether the money that he got out of Ukraine, and apparently it was millions of dollars, whether that was, a legitimate payment for legitimate services or whether it was some corrupt thing. And, increasingly it's looking like maybe it wasn't all that good a thing. Let's say it might have been corrupt.
Maybe you should look at Kushner's laptop to see what kind of payola he got from the Soviets.
Oh, God. I mean, if you want to, Jared Kushner or his wife, I mean, they made over $100 million the last year that they were in the White House. It's just, I think that Hunter Biden is on the scale of graft and corruption, really way down there. But I'm with you, Frank. If we're going to look into Hunter Biden, we should be looking into Jared and Ivanka. Absolutely. Yeah. Frank, thanks a lot for the call. Susan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Well, yeah, I was just wondering, it's actually about our media as well. Because I have a friend who is Taiwanese, and he listens to their news in Taiwanese. And he says they're getting a whole different take on the war, at least of the Zelinsky. That he claims that he provoked this war, and that when he came into office, he knew very little about politics and not much about their history. And when that treaty ended, where they were supposed to remain neutral, Zelinsky, because his ratings were dipping really badly, decided to do some outrageous things. And one of them was he put in their constitution that they set a goal to be in NATO. Right. I was just wondering why.
That all happened, Susan, after Crimea was annexed by the Russians. I mean, prior to that, the Ukrainian position was officially neutrality. They were and this goes back to the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, where they gave up. They were the third largest nuclear power in the world. They gave up 1,900 nuclear weapons. And in exchange for that, the United States, the UK, and Russia guaranteed their sovereignty and their territorial integrity. That held until 2014, I think it was, or maybe 2015, whatever the year was, that I think, whichever, till that year I'm pretty sure it was 2014, that Russia came in and took Crimea. At that point, Ukraine said, whoa, okay, so much for neutrality. That doesn't seem to work very well. We need to be part of NATO. There was broad public support for that across Ukraine.
Oh, okay. Well, that's different too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm guessing that your friend is not getting the official Taiwanese news or Taiwanese news from some real Taiwanese news source, but is getting it from, you know, I mean, Taiwan is an open democracy, much like the United States and South Korea and Japan. And there are right-wing news sources that are shoveling BS as fast as they can in Taiwan, just like there are in South Korea. It's the old Moon family, you know, and with a crown of bullets around his head and all this kind of stuff. He was a weapons manufacturer, and his son is carrying on. Well, his whole family is now carrying on now that he's passed away. But you know, and then there's the Epoch Times. That used to be published out of Hong Kong by right wingers. I don't know if they've moved to Taiwan or not, or if that's where that's coming from. But they were always sponsoring at the talkers conventions. They were always sponsoring all the right wing talkers, and so it's like there's all this strange stuff going on. But this is freedom of speech. These people could say anything they want, but I would, and I can't tell you what the Taiwanese media is saying, in Mandarin to their people, because I don't speak the language and don't have access to it. But my guess is that your friend is not actually getting official Taiwanese news or even Taiwanese news from major news agencies in Taiwan, that he's listening, that, because he speaks Mandarin or whatever dialect, that he's listening to the Taiwanese version of Rush Limbaugh. Yeah, exactly. Some right-wing crank. So I would, if you're going to go back and talk to him about it, that would be my question. Susan, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Lisa in Newark, Delaware. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
Hey, I was thinking about this whole Republican branding and about the idea that there's this huge increase of crime in the liberal-run cities. And I saw Glenn Kessler from Washington Post on, and he fact-checked. He just has an article out about red state, blue state crime rates.
Right.
And it is just a lie that keeps getting perpetuated on media stations. I even saw MSNBC, someone talking about these huge rates of crime in the cities, in liberal-run cities, and it's BS.
Yeah, actually, you have a higher murder rate, and I think most other violent crimes on a per capita basis in red counties in the United States than you do in blue counties.
What?
But
like Jacksonville, Florida.
Exactly. But in terms of absolute numbers, cities are always going to be higher because they've got more people there. But absolute numbers are meaningless. You've got to put them in context. It's got to be how many people get murdered out of every million citizens or out of every 100,000 citizens. And it has to do
with gun laws too, because they're very lax gun laws in the red cities.
Exactly.
In the red states. But Glenn Kessler is the king of all kings as far as fact-checking goes.
Okay, I'll have to check it out, Lisa. It sounds
I got it on my phone. I fact-check a lot.
Okay. Lisa, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're absolutely right, and I've written about that, actually, that if you want to have a decent quality of life, in fact, this should be my op-ed tomorrow. If you want to have a decent quality of life, do not live in a red county or a red state. And it's so easy to document that stuff. We'll be right back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back on the other side of this break. And welcome back. Doug in Martinez, California. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for having me on your show first. I've got an idea I'd like to throw at you, and a challenge. I'd like you to tell me why it won't work. Right now, Biden is basically fighting an economic war against Putin, and at the level I don't think we've ever seen in history.
Yeah.
And it is, of course, a multi-headed attack, but I feel we're missing out on a really big head. and it won't cost a penny, and Biden can do it with a simple executive order tomorrow. It falls under Department of Interior. And that is that they allow the states to build and operate free of any federal charges on federal land in their state, state-owned and operated solar farms. Right now, solar, cost-wise, is getting down there with the other energy sources. If you factor things in like the looming disasters of the coal ash ponds, it's actually cheaper.
It's even cheaper when you don't factor in externalities like that. It's the price of solar and wind have just collapsed.
These things will be incredibly profitable on the state level.
Right.
Now there'll be 3 recommendations, and that's all they are. The states can do it any way they want. That they fund their first one with double tax-free state municipal bonds, not to be paid back by the taxpayers of the state, but by revenue from the highly profitable solar farms.
Right.
They could write it like a zero coupon bond, so it pays at the end. First one comes online, square acre, square mile, square 100 miles. Most of the revenue will go towards paying back the bond and maintaining it. What's left over goes towards building the next one. Because it has money in from the first, it'll need less bonds floated. Third, even less. Fourth, even less. Whole thing becomes self-financing and snowballs.
Right.
Anybody who's driven cross-country, just what you can see from the freeway, and that's a small percent. Miles and miles and miles of unused land, most of it federally owned, most of it so dry it can't even be grazed on. Bigger, bigger, bigger. It would literally shade the land, bring down warming locally, and lock in moisture. An incredible amount of jobs. Eventually it'll get so huge, the states can continue the expansion and start siphoning off money to bring down state taxes and fund vital services, which will be an economic stimulator.
Doug, why do we need federal land given to the states to do this when most of the states are sitting on huge piles of state land?
That's a good question. Why aren't they doing it? I agree with you on that.
Hey, on TV right now, Biden just got his second booster shot.
Good. I'm looking forward to mine.
I tried to get one yesterday,
anyway,
and they were like, it hasn't been approved by Oregon yet. Anyhow, back to you, Doug. I'm sorry.
Okay, it would create an incredible amount of jobs, which will be an economic stimulator, and not down in a coal pit getting black lung disease.
Right.
Despite the second recommendation, and that is that they use convict labor to bring down the cost, get these people in jail up and working every day, learning a profession they'll have when they paid their debt to society to help empty out our overcrowded jails.
Doug, you ought to write this thing up as a white paper, or as an op-ed and publish it someplace. I think you might be onto something. I'd have to think it through. I'm not an energy expert at that level,
well,
at
what
the level of public policy.
It would flood the market with cheap electricity.
Right, which would be a good
and the
thing.
Price of oil would plummet, sticking it to Putin.
There you go. Doug, thanks a lot for the call. It's a good idea. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So did you hear the story about the 3 white guys, 20, 22, 24 years old, who just pleaded guilty to trying to attack power grids in 3 different parts of the United States? According to the Justice Department, their scheme was that they were going to bring down electricity for 3 basically major cities or major regions of the United States. And the theory of this program is sort of like what Tim McVeigh was all about back in 1990, I think it was 3, when he blew up the federal building. Their scheme was that doing so, cutting off the power to these cities. Well, this is from the Department of Justice. Quote, the defendants believed their plan would cost the government millions of dollars and cause unrest for Americans in the region. They had conversations about how the possibility of power being out for months would cause a race war and induce the next Great Depression. They had suicide pills and everything. Why aren't we talking about white terrorism in America? There's a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. have to edit those. Welcome back. Steve in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Well, you guys were talking about the space hotel, and I thought I'd chime in on that.
Okay.
To me, it's kind of it's a mixed bag. It's not all bad and it's not all good. Scientists have said that if, in the long run, if we want the human species to survive, we need to start spreading out and colonizing other planets, because eventually we will get hit by a meteor. But that's long term. I do think that it is a good thing that every step that we take towards putting our big toe into that big outer space is a good thing. This just improves our technology for our rockets. And we learn every time we send a rocket to space.
Yeah, was certainly the case in the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah, and still today, that stuff, I don't know, it might be private information, but it gets out, I'm also against what they're doing at the same time, just because I guess in a way it's not terribly harmful, but it's just, the money could be spent on more important things here that are more urgent. I agree with you. The main reason why it's a bad thing is because of the pollution. I thought that guy had a brilliant point about that. That's a lot of pollution.
Yeah.
And if they want to do a hotel, then they're going to be sending people up every week, right?
Yeah.
I think that you are absolutely right. The government should require them to use hydrogen fuel.
Yeah, although
Legally.
hydrogen fuel is not entirely clean, it's in and of itself, because typically the easiest way that they get hydrogen fuel these days is they extract it from oil. They produce it out of hydrocarbons. But
I didn't know that.
Yeah, or you have to have an electric source if you're going to do it through electrolysis. You can't. There's not enough hydrogen in the atmosphere to just extract it. You've got to make it, basically. Either draw it out of hydrocarbons or split water and take it. But great. Keep thinking, Chris. Excuse me, Steve. That's a good one. I appreciate it. And Chris in Elmhurst, Illinois. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hi, Tom. All the people yelling about gas prices and the oil companies restricting supplies, why aren't they and the Democrats in D.C. yelling about DeJoy buying all gas-powered mail trucks, which will further cut supplies? I mean, this is nuts.
Democrats are trying to pass a law through the House of Representatives right now that would force DeJoy to buy at least 90% electric-powered vehicles. And I don't know the status of it right now, but I think it's a good idea.
Oh, that would be great, because all my husband's coworkers keep complaining about the gas. And he tells them this, and half of them don't even know about what DeJoy is doing.
Yeah. Well, Republicans are shills for the fossil fuel industry. It's fossil fuel billionaires who run most of the Republican propaganda operations or fund them anyway. So, yeah, spot on. Chris, thank you for the call. Holly in Washington, D.C. Hey, Holly, what's up? We have a little less than a minute, Holly, by the way.
Yeah, this is quick. When you were rattling off all the calls that Trump could have been making while the insurrection was happening, did you say that Mayor Bowser should have been called on to call the National Guard? Did I understand you to say that?
I did say that.
Well, the D.C. National Guard is controlled by the executive branch, which happens to be the Department
you're
of
absolutely
Defense and
right.
the President.
It's the only branch that's controlled by the president.
That's right, and that's why this makes it even more egregious, and I don't like that point not being understood.
Yeah, well, thank you for correcting me on that, Holly, and you're absolutely right. My memory is kicking in here, and you're right. Because D.C. has no governor, and so there's not a governor to direct the D.C. National Guard, and so that defaults to the president, because the D.C. is
exactly, that's one of their strongest cases for being a state.
Yeah.
That particular issue,
It really is.
Thank you for letting me correct that.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate it. I always, I always appreciate it when we can make sure that everything that gets said on this show you can take to the bank. You can argue with your friends about it. You can write about it. You can share it with other people because it's true. And on those rare occasions when I get something wrong, and I was just ad-libbing that, he could have called the mayor of D.C. I was wrong. Thank you, Holly. We'll be right back. Stick around. Joe Manchin up next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here with Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 218. The subhead is, If Corporations Are Persons, Why Aren't There Crimes in the Crime Statistics? Every year, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues a press release on its Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which determines the nation's crime index. It reports crimes by persons, which excludes, strangely enough, corporate persons, even when the corporations have been convicted of felonies. In its entire history, the FBI has never issued a report on crimes by corporate persons, although its reports on crimes by human persons are well-researched and well-publicized. The upshot of this is that when you ask people how most money and property are stolen or how most people are killed, they think of burglars and muggers and bank robbers and crimes of passion. They think of human persons. The reality, though, is that more money and property are stolen by or lost to corporate criminals than to human criminals. Russell Mochaber's corporate crime reporter noted that in 1998, when the FBI estimated robberies and burglaries at almost $4 billion, the cost of corporate crimes was in the hundreds of billions, as it is every year. These include security scams that ran around $15 billion that year, car repair fraud that hit around $40 billion that year, insurance swindles and corporate fraud found on your health insurance, HMO, and hospital billings that runs between $100 and $400 billion a year, 100 times greater than all the burglaries in the country combined. Then there are the occasional really big crimes like Neil Bush's savings and loans scandal that then Attorney General Dick Thornburgh called the biggest white-collar swindle in history, or the actions of banksters and defense contractors that get no investigations whatsoever from either the Bush or the Obama administrations. More people die as a result of corporate activity than because of the actions of deranged killers or overwrought spouses. According to the Corporate Crime Reporter, the FBI reported that 1998 saw about 19,000 Americans murdered at the hands of other people. But that same year, 56,000 people died from work-related diseases like black lung and asbestosis that went unreported by the FBI. And many times that number died from the silent violence of pollution, contaminated food, hazardous consumer products, and hospital malpractice. Much of the human death caused by corporate activity has arguable benefits. For example, the many cancers caused by compounds associated with plastics or pesticides. But the cost of these deaths isn't factored into the unit cost of the products. So there's no financial incentive for industry to develop toxin-free or toxin-reduced alternatives, or to use the more expensive but less toxic alternatives that already exist. This is a process known as internalizing profits and externalizing costs. The corporation profits from the toxins, and the public pays for the cancers, both in healthcare costs and lost productivity from sick and dying workers. It's been a standard operating procedure for centuries and was pushed back against for only a few decades in the 1960s and 70s, with the consumer movement that came out of the publication of Rachel Carlson's book Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speed. Since the Reagan administration, however, dumping externalities on the public has become a common and accepted practice across the business spectrum. One of the easiest ways to do it is to simply move the toxin-producing or toxin-using factory or process to a country with lax environmental and labor laws like China or Vietnam, so that not only are labor costs lowered, but more importantly, the cost of dealing with externalities like workmen's compensation from injury and exposure and toxic emissions and death in the workplace, so that all those costs drop to zero or close to it. And then there are the big mistakes. In 1998, one of America's largest meatpacking companies replaced a refrigerating unit on one of its processing lines. Shortly thereafter, the detectors it had in place on the line to look for the deadly cold-loving bacteria like Listeria monocytogenes started to react, indicating high levels of bacterial contamination. The company's response was immediate. Carolyn Smith DeWall of the Center for Science and the Public Interest told reporters Russell Mochaber and Robert Weissman, quote, "Then their studies started coming up positive, so they stopped testing. This company's Fourth Amendment right to privacy blocked surprise inspections by the government." They're a person, right? The detectors were apparently turned off for a full month before the Centers for Disease Control frantically tried to find the source of the bacteria that was killing people, mostly children, all over the United States. Used DNA fingerprinting to track the bacteria that was causing the nationwide outbreak of Listeria back to the plant, provoking a nationwide recall of millions of pounds of the product. But during that month, hundreds of people consuming this company's products were sickened by Listeria, and 21 humans died from it. The U.S. Attorney's Office, according to Mochaber and Weissman, said, quote, "There was insufficient evidence to bring a felony charge against the company. Instead, the company paid a $200,000 fine and issued an unprecedented joint press release with the Bush administration's USDA that managed to say that the company had paid the fine without ever mentioning the brand name of the product that had contaminated and caused the deaths." This is truly amazing. I mean, corporate crime costs us more and kills more people, and we don't even talk about it. It's amazing. Anyhow, the book is Unequal Protection: How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. So right after President Biden came out, and we talked about this on, I think it was Monday, I'm pretty sure it was Monday, proposing a 20% unavoidable tax on the income or the increase in their asset value of people whose net worth is over $100 million. So basically, you know, you guys are going to pay income taxes whether you want to or not. And the reason for this, of course, is because billionaires typically don't take incomes. Jeff Bezos last year took an income of less than $90,000 a year. Or maybe it was the year before last. But why would he do that? Well, because he doesn't want to pay taxes. So instead, they borrow against their stock, against their assets, and then they live on that borrowed money. And if they're really slick, they own the bank that they borrowed the money from. So the interest they pay goes back into the, increases their asset base. So Biden says, okay, so these guys are paying nothing in taxes. Jeff Bezos pays less than 1% income taxes on his income. And I can pretty much guarantee if you're making any kind of reasonable living these days in the United States, you're paying more than 1%. Also, they don't pay any Social Security tax. They don't pay any Medicare tax. I mean, yes, 57% of Americans now don't pay income taxes because they make so little. 40 years of Reaganomics has bit really badly. But 100% of Americans who get a paycheck pay pay Social Security and Medicare taxes. But not Jeff Bezos. Well, he does on his $81,000, but not on the millions and millions of dollars that sustain his lifestyle. And it's not, and I don't mean to pick on Jeff Bezos. I mean, this is how they do it. And they've been doing it this way for decades. This is all stuff that Reagan legalized. And so Donald Trump. So President Joe Biden comes out and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's my budget. Here's how we're going to fund a good chunk of this because Joe Manchin said he doesn't want any more deficits. And so this is going to get rid of the deficit. We're going to collect some cash, some income taxes on these very, very rich people. So what does Joe Manchin say? Joe Manchin, the coal king, the New York Times has just done such an expose on this guy. Joe Manchin comes out and says, no. He says, I'd rather tax people who work for their money than people whose money makes money for them. Actually, he didn't say that. The former Michigan gubernatorial candidate, Dr. Abdul El Sayed, tweeted that is what Joe Manchin is saying. In essence, this is what the White House explained. The billionaire minimum income tax will ensure that the very wealthiest Americans pay a tax rate of at least 20% on their full income, including unrealized appreciation. This minimum tax would make sure that the wealthiest Americans no longer pay a tax rate lower than teachers and firefighters. And, they've figured over the next 10 years it'll generate $360 billion. But as writer and activist David Atkins pointed out, and this, by the way, is from a piece over on Common Dreams titled Manchin Blasted for Opposing Biden's Plan to Tax U.S. Billionaires. David Atkins pointed out, Manchin is apparently eager to tax the obscenely rich in every way except the ones by which they actually make their obscene money. Ron Wyden is going to be apparently holding hearings on this. It's fascinating stuff. But, Joe Manchin, yes, let's do what the fossil fuel industry wants. And yes, let's do what the fossil fuel billionaires want. Oh, man. A reform in West Virginia can't come fast enough, I'm telling you. Okay, a couple last stories here, one in particular. And then I'll pick up your phone calls. This is, Hunter actually wrote this over on dailycoz.com. It's titled, House Republican Resolution Would Erase House Impeachment of Trump for Ukraine Extortion. And he's pointing out that back in 2016, it was really, Russia who attacked our elections, not Ukraine. But Donald Trump was impeached for telling Volodymyr Zelensky, who was saying, I would like some I think they were Stinger missiles. He said, I would like some of these anti-tank missiles. And Trump said, well, there's $400 million worth of it, but I put it on hold a couple of weeks ago because I want to ask you a favor. I want you to find some dirt on, you don't even actually have to find the dirt. You just have to announce publicly that you're opening an investigation into Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Just like, Comey announced 2 weeks before the election in 2016 that he was opening an investigation into Hillary Clinton. Just do that. That's all you have to do, Mr. Zelinsky, President Zelinsky. So that was Trump's shtick, and he got impeached for it in the U.S. House of Representatives. He wasn't removed from office. He wasn't convicted in the Senate, but he was impeached. And so now comes, Mark Wayne Mullen, this fellow in the House of Representatives. He's from Oklahoma. not a man known for his great intellect. He has introduced a new House resolution that would, quote, expunge Donald Trump's first impeachment. He's doing this because he says Democrats were, quote, manipulating a perfect phone call with a vulnerable nation for political gain. Right. And, most people looking at this proposal by a Republican in the House of Representatives to pass a law in the House of Representatives saying, remember that impeachment of Donald Trump, we take it back. Most people look at that and go, oh, this guy is nuts. Or, it'll never pass. Or he's crazy. Or, why even tell me this? Well, I'm here to say I think that Mark Wayne Mullins, it's all one word, Markwayne, one word. Mark Wayne Mullen, I think his proposal should actually get a hearing in the U.S. House of Representatives. I think Nancy Pelosi should assign it to a committee, and there should be hearings on it. Why? Because I think most Americans have forgotten what Donald Trump did. That he committed extortion, or he tried to. He threatened a sovereign nation with the loss of the ability to defend themselves, an ability, by the way, that had been guaranteed to them by previous presidents, previous administrations, and said, I will only give you these weapons if you will produce dirt on Hillary Clinton, on Joe Biden and his son Hunter. So I think it's a brilliant idea, Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma. I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. Let's hold the hearings. Whether the timing of his delay of Trump, Trump actually withheld these weapons. Is that one of the reasons so many people have died in Ukraine? Inquiring minds want to know. Congress should be looking into this. Was Putin's decision to invade Ukraine in part informed by Trump withholding weaponry? Keep in mind, Trump was president just a year and a half ago. Was that, withholding of weaponry from Ukraine something that made Putin think, oh yeah, I could do this, or I should do this, or it'll be a hell of a lot easier to do this? Congress should be investigating this. And hey, if the best way to make that happen, and with Republican support, is to take Congressman Mullen's suggestion that Congress should open a discussion about whether or not to expunge Trump's impeachment, good by me. If he wants to pass a law that only Republicans can blackmail foreign governments for political purposes, take a shot at it. America needs this conversation. I think, the majority of, let us not forget, the majority of Republican lawmakers voted to overturn the last election. The majority of Republican lawmakers, virtually all of them, all but a very tiny handful, voted to impeach Donald Trump, or voted not to impeach Donald Trump twice, for clear crimes that he had committed against the United States of America. And it's like, we have such short memories in this country. Maybe we need a reminder. Back with your calls on the other side of this break. Stick around at 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. And we'll be right back. And welcome back. Joseph in San Diego. Hey, Joseph, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Well, thank you very much for taking my call, Mr. Hartmann. I'm I love Free Speech TV, and every day I'm like an addict. But
okay,
I'm just learning so much at the age now of like 66, almost 67. So my question is, I have a question. I heard this, thank God for the pandemic, because we've learned so much staying in our houses and watching Free Speech TV and listening to all the great pundits about what the truth is. So I heard this little bit of information that American, say, facilitated the President Putin being elected, because before Putin, and I'm a little bit, I've forgotten who was in before Putin, but
Boris Yeltsin.
Before Putin, yes.
And Yeltsin picked him.
And I heard that there were, he wasn't really there. There was a group of individuals, and one person was really ruthless. I can't remember the story, but the name. This one person was ruthless. They said, no, we don't want him in there. There's 6 different people we can pick from, and the American, whether it was the CIA or whoever was in charge of, putting people in power around the world since World War II, they picked Putin as a more
I've never heard that story,
less ruthless person, and then the American intelligence agencies, maybe the CIA or whoever, facilitated that, as we have all around the world, facilitated different presidents and dictators and taking them out at different times.
I just did a pretty deep dive, Joseph, into the transition for my next book on neoliberalism. There's a whole chapter in it about Russia, and did a pretty deep dive into the politics of Russia around the time of. In fact, I was in Russia. I was in Kaliningrad around the time of first of all the election of Boris Yeltsin, and then the ascension of Putin. And I've never heard that story, and I've seen no evidence that might back that up. Putin was considered, my understanding is, Putin was considered, a well-informed apparatchik, a good bureaucrat. Yeltsin thought he would run the ship of state well. The problem was that, between 91 and 2000, basically, during that extraordinary transition period, if you want to pin this on the U.S., and this will be in my book, by the way, you can pin it on the Chicago School, on Milton Friedman. The guy who was basically the philosopher king and economist of the Republican Party, and continues to be to this day, although he's been dead for quite some time. And, with neoliberalism, with this argument that the market should rule everything, that everything should be public-private partnerships, that government shouldn't be doing anything that it can't be done by private industry. And what that does is it always produces oligarchy. And Putin just played the oligarchy game really, really well. I've never, like I said, if you can find something, tweet it to me. I'd love to see it. But I've never seen anything suggesting that we put Putin into office. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. 27 Republican senators sent a letter to the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, echoing talking points that the American Petroleum Institute pushed out on Twitter recently, saying that basically if we're going to stop importing Russian oil into the United States, which, by the way, the Russian oil imports into the U.S. are just a trickle. It's just a tiny drop in the bucket. If we're going to stop doing that, we need to, and these are some quotes from the API Twitter, we need to unleash America's energy. We need to release permits for energy development on federal lands. We need to issue offshore leasing plans for the next 5 years. We need to accelerate energy permitting infrastructure. We need to reduce regulatory and legal uncertainty. Right. It's a scam. And these 27 Republican senators are owned by the big fossil fuel companies because the Supreme Court allowed it with their Citizens United decision. We have to do something about this. There's a whole video rant about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And we'll welcome back, picking up your calls here, CJ in Madison. Hey, CJ, what's up?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom.
Love your show. Don't agree with you very often. Afghanistan and Ukraine proves America is not safe with a Democratic president. President Obama.
My recollection is that those things happened under George W. Bush. I didn't know he was a Democrat.
Obama and Biden gave Ukraine blankets. President Trump gave Ukraine javelins and stingers.
Yeah, after he had to back down and he got impeached. After he got outed. Come on, CJ. We know that Trump was a corrupt.
Obama drew a red line in Syria and did nothing and watched Russia invade Crimea.
I agree with you.
This is President Biden's war.
Well,
he's the one that
I would not say it's President Biden's war, but
Afghanistan.
But CJ, I agree with you that President Obama wimped out on this stuff. I'm with you. What are you going to do about it?
So did Biden.
Well, Biden was his vice president.
Wimped out on Afghanistan. He left $85 million worth of equipment. You think Ukraine could use that?
Well, it would have been a hell of a lot easier, CJ, let me just finish a sentence once in a while. It would have been a hell of a lot easier to get that $85 million worth of equipment out of Afghanistan if Donald Trump had not closed 7 of the 8 American Air Force bases in that country months before he left office.
Who gave up Bagram? Who gave up Bagram?
That was the only one that was left, if my recollection is correct, CJ.
Yeah,
but Donald Trump shut down 7 out of the 8 of them. Well, the United States, we decided we were going to leave the country. Yeah,
Who gave it
sure.
up?
So Biden ended the war. I don't think you're going to find a lot of people really furious about that, CJ. And if Donald Trump had not shut down 7 of those 8 American Air Force bases in Afghanistan just a few months before he left office, then it would have been a heck of a lot easier to get more people out and to get more equipment out.
You're going to find out in November, Tom.
Yeah, well, CJ, you may well be right, and you know, we'll see, as they say, as the old Zen master Mike Dirks used to say. Ziggy in Anchorage, Alaska. Hey, Ziggy, what's up?
Hey, let's go to something more about energy and about how the government treats our resources. Think about this: if every corporation was to pay a dividend to the country for our technology that they got from us, that we paid for, when the taxpayers paid for all this technology and
you
all
mean
this
like the internet
that they use,
we all paid to develop the internet.
Should be paying because they should be paying a dividend to the country for that technology. We paid for it. It was our technology that they took and they profit from.
Right.
Some of that profit should go back to the people at all times.
I think you make a strong argument. It's sort of like, you know, it's like Alaska with the permanent fund. You know, they're saying, okay, you're going to take oil out from underneath Alaskan soil. You're going to leave some of that money right here in Alaska, and we're going to pass it out to all the people. Maybe we should do the same thing, not only with oil and you know, mined resources, but also with the internet.
All the corporations who have profit from the American people's technology that we paid for, when you talk about computers and all this other stuff, that we, the people, taxpayers, paid for.
Yeah. No,
So
I'm
it
with you,
should be-
Ziggy. You're
it
starting
should
to
be-
repeat yourself, but I'm with you. Thank you for the call. Max in Sacramento. Hey, Max, what's up?
Yes, I think that Congress should instead, you know, have all these committees work full time on it. You know, instead of
on what,
you know, taking breaks and make laws and all that. You
On
know,
what?
we got so many laws on the books.
Hang on just a second, Max. What do they need to be looking into?
Trump.
Oh,
and his crimes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. You know.
Well, the January 6th committee, you know, is very narrowly focused, and
yeah, but they're not working fast enough. You know, by the time this gets over with, you know, we'll have a new administration, and I'm afraid it may be Trump again.
I don't think Trump is going to be president again. I'm frankly far more worried about Ron DeSantis or Tom Cotton, or
too,
you know, one of these guys who are actually.
I don't think they're going to make it with Trump on the side.
Yeah, I don't think Trump is going to be a factor by 2024, but I am concerned that Trump has shown wannabe fascist neo-dictators of America, or neo-fascist dictators of America, how to do it. And because he has not suffered any consequence from this, they're figuring, hey, what the hell? And I think, the line is relatively short, and it's fairly clear. Rick Scott, Ron DeSantis, a lot of them from Florida, Rick Scott, Ron DeSantis, Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley. These guys want power. Back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with you on the other side of the break here at the bottom of the hour. The Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff, with a foreword by Richard Clark. This is from the foreword. For some Americans, George W. Bush looks good by comparison to the incumbent, Donald Trump. In his post-presidency, Bush has devoted himself to worthy causes and acted in a bipartisan manner. The 43rd president should, however, be judged not by comparison to America's worst president, nor by what Bush may have done after leaving office. He should be evaluated for his actions in office, his nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance. This volume from Stephen Markoff provides the evidence for such an evaluation. You can judge for yourself. For me, there is little doubt. I, unfortunately, witnessed Bush and his administration make many of their most cataclysmic decisions. I was in the room when some of them occurred. When in December 2000, the Supreme Court of the United States decided on a 5-4 vote that George W. Bush would become the 43rd president, I was the Special Assistant to the President for National Security and National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism for President William J. Clinton. I anticipated leaving the White House on January 20th, 2001, when the Clinton presidency ended. However, I was asked by the incoming administration to stay on for an unspecified period because, as it was explained to me, there was no one on Bush's incoming team who knew much about terrorism or who wanted my job. Departing Clinton administration officials stressed to the newly arriving Bush team and to Bush himself the importance and urgency of dealing with the al-Qaeda terrorist threat. Indeed, the Clinton administration had developed an extensive series of further steps to combat al-Qaeda that it would have taken had it continued in office, or indeed had Vice President Al Gore assumed office in 2001. Within days of Bush's inauguration, I asked for an urgent meeting at the cabinet level to review both the threat and the plan to ratchet up the measures against al-Qaeda. No such meeting occurred until a week before 9/11, and that meeting was inconclusive. From January 2001 through the second week in September, Bush personally received frequent intelligence warnings that al-Qaeda posed an imminent threat. He convened no meetings to address the issue. His inner circle of national security advisors did nothing, despite frequent urgings by the CIA director and the national coordinator, including such vivid imagery as our asking in writing that they consider a near future in which there would be hundreds of dead bodies in the streets of America. Instead, they focused on Iraq and the regime of Saddam Hussein. Bush's nonfeasance cost American lives. Following the deaths of over 3,000 innocent civilians on 9/11, the Bush administration attempted to tie the al-Qaeda attack to Iraq, which had nothing to do with it. Despite CIA and FBI analyses that reiterated Iraq's non-involvement, the Bush administration almost immediately followed the 9/11 attack by beginning to make plans to invade Iraq. Senior Bush officials spoke privately of the need to demonstrate our strength in the wake of the 9/11 attack, show our might by destroying the largest army in the Middle East, and thereby also prove our willingness to take U.S. military casualties to achieve our ends. Prior to 9/11, foreign terrorists who had attacked Americans had been successfully sought out throughout the world and arrested by U.S. law enforcement authorities, assisted by the intelligence community. Many terrorists had been returned to U.S. territory, given their Miranda rights, provided with counsel, tried in our civilian criminal courts, convicted, sentenced, and incarcerated in maximum security prison cells. One, tried by the Commonwealth of Virginia, was executed. Despite this record, the Bush administration abandoned criminal process and established its own extrajudicial system for dealing with terrorists post 9/11. That new system used techniques that any objective observer would judge were torture. Perhaps the most well-known torture technique was the procedure known as waterboarding. The United States government had tried World War II Japanese military personnel for using the exact same technique. They were found guilty, and some were executed by hanging. The United States Senate's Committee on Intelligence conducted the most extensive oversight and investigation and examination in its history on the issue of torture during the Bush administration. That voluminous study concluded that torture was employed and that it had not, despite administration claims to the contrary, uniquely revealed information that had prevented terrorist attacks. To the contrary, it showed that tortured prisoners, unable to satisfy their interrogators with information that the terrorists did not know, instead guessed at what kind of story would stop the torture and then fabricated information of the kind they thought their prosecutors wanted to hear. Bush was not only aware of the torture, he approved it. His role in giving authorization for such acts can rightly be considered criminal malfeasance, as should his orders to invade Iraq. Among the many justifications the Bush administration considered for their invasion and occupation of Iraq, they chose finally to make the alleged weapons of mass destruction existence their chief complaint. The book, The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So how do you know which party has the most crooks in it? You know, the Republicans are always saying, oh, those Democrats are soft on crime and, a lot of murders in Democrat-run cities. Well, for the record, first off, red states and red counties have a higher per capita murder rates than do blue states and blue counties. This is just a fact. But secondly, let's look at some of the administrations. I mean, the Obama administration had no criminal indictments. The Jimmy Carter administration had 1. The Bill Clinton administration had 2. But what about the Republican administrations? It was 16 for George W. Bush. It was 26 criminal indictments for Ronald Reagan. Richard Nixon's administration had 76 criminal indictments. And of course, the full-time professional rapist and grifter, Donald Trump, he had 215 criminal indictments. So who's really soft on crime? We got a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. And welcome back. By the way, just this just out. We were asking the question at the very beginning of the show. Did with the 7.5-hour gap on the White House call log, was this because somebody in the White House was conspiring to cover up Trump's crimes on January 6th, or was it because Trump was using burner phones? In other words, was he doing it himself, or did he have help, basically? And Hugo Lowell in Washington, D.C., a reporter for The Guardian, is reporting in The Guardian today that they have verified that at least one of the calls made during that 7-hour period was made from the official White House phone system. It went to Senator Mike Lee. It was when Trump thought he was calling Tommy Tuberville, one of the co-conspirators in this thing, or one of the alleged co-conspirators. And it went to Mike Lee instead, and Mike Lee handed the phone to Tommy. And they've got multiple witnesses who have confirmed that, yes, that the number that rang in was the official White House number, which is why Mike Lee took the call, and, et cetera. And that doesn't show up on the log. And it should automatically show up on the log. So that would suggest that that what we're looking at here is a good old-fashioned Watergate-style cover-up. Very interesting. So, anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Mark in Lexington, North Carolina. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. How are you today?
I am great.
Today's my birthday.
Hey, happy birthday, Mark.
I'm 59 years old, and there ain't a damn thing to celebrate. I was going to respond to one thing, but I want to respond to one other thing first.
Okay.
You had a caller just a few minutes ago that I was listening to that was blaming the chaos in Afghanistan on Joe Biden. Like you said, we have a very short memory. It was exposed that Donald Trump dragged his feet for over a year on visas for anybody from Afghanistan to get to the United States.
You're absolutely right, Mark. I had forgotten about that, or I would have thrown that in too.
He did not want any Afghans to come over here.
Right. No more brown people in America. That was his mantra.
Exactly. And the other thing I want to bring up is, Donald Trump asking Putin to release information that doesn't exist.
You're talking about Trump yesterday calling for Putin to release information about Hunter Biden?
How low can this man go?
I don't think there's a bottom. I really don't, Mark. I don't think there's any bottom to where Trump will go.
We've got tens of thousands of people dead in Ukraine, millions displaced, and this man has only one criteria, and that is to make it about himself.
Yeah.
And I I almost feel like just giving up on the damn country. Like, give it to the Republicans and let them have it. Because, I can't talk to anybody anymore. I reverted to the old saying, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. So I spend most of my time scraping stickers off of fuel pumps. I don't know if it's around where you are, but up here where I am in Republicanville, every fuel pump's got a gas sticker on it with a picture of Joe Biden pointing to the price of gas, saying I did that.
Right.
So I ride around with a razor blade and scrape those off as much as I can.
Yeah, they'll just put them right back on. Mark, we do have a political divide in this country, and it's been exacerbated over the last 4 decades by right-wing billionaires pouring, great gobs of cash into the information arena through think tanks and their media outlets and setting up all these.
I know who we're owned by.
Yeah, who's that?
Yeah, I know who we're owned by. One other thing I want to say is thank you so much because you mentioned watching you really cost me a lot of sleep, but it also caused me a lot of knowledge. One thing I could never understand was Noam Chomsky, and why is this linguist so important? Why is he so important? Once I did a deep dive into him, understood. Smart people or political people dumbing down language to the masses.
Yep.
And the way they manipulate language.
Chomsky called it manufacturing consent.
Manufacturing consent, exactly.
Yeah.
And I had watched that 2 or 3 times. I watched everything I could on him. And thank you for having Bert Wolff, Professor Wolff, on your show today. Yeah. Because I follow him greatly, too. And thank you so much for your program. And I will always support free speech. Thank you so much.
Well, Mark, thank you very much. Thanks for your kind words. Michael in Barrington Hills, Illinois. Hey, Michael, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks very much. I have a suggestion about the nuclear questions that have been raised by Putin and our fears of him and his generals. And every time he brings it up again, if it comes up again, Biden's administration should simply say, and since we have 5,500 weapons and they have 5,500, Biden should say, we're going to reduce our weapons right away, right now. We're going to drop them decommission or take them apart or whatever. And we're going to counter your threat with reducing the nuclear weapons. I just wanted to get your idea about this and maybe tie this to Professor Wolff's international plug wash type meeting that he suggested.
I think when a bully walks up and threatens you to threatens to punch you in the face, that's not when you put your face forward and say, "Okay, take a shot."
Well, we still have a lot of weapons, you know what I mean? And I'm thinking it's just a political kind of thing we could do.
I think when a bully comes up and says, "I'm going to punch you in the face," you kick him in the nuts. I mean, it's.
We don't want to use nuclear weapons. So.
No, I don't. I'm not saying use nuclear weapons. I'm saying, wound that bully with a different strategy.
Okay, all right.
Well, I'm just sorry for the crude metaphor, but.
Yeah, and very quickly, I was raised in Vermont, and I was interested and amused by your comments about the mice in Montpelier.
Yeah.
That was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a little high school there, and we used to kind of be afraid to go to Montpelier because of the mice. I just want to let you know that.
Seriously?
No, not really.
Oh, okay. All right.
Montpelier was just a little tiny burg, even though it's a small capital in the world. Well, but it's really a nice little dynamic city.
Oh, yeah, and it's only like 20,000 people. I mean, it's a small town, and you know,
a lot of good coffee shops. There's a lot of activity there.
Oh, some great restaurants, some wonderful people. It's one of my favorite places to have lived in my whole entire life. It's just that it's really, really cold. I got kind of a dark spot on my face here from getting frostbite on one New Year's Eve in Montpelier, Vermont.
It's warming there. It's warming all over there, though. You know.
Yeah, that's true. Michael, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate it. Nola in Inglewood, California. Hey, Nola, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just got a little irritated when you were talking about the Hunter Biden scandal and saying about a blind computer repair person, and it rubbed me the wrong way because we blind and severely low vision, we do exist. We do use computers. We use a special software called a screen reader that says out loud what's on our computer screen. And I knew personally, in 2 different times in my life, instructors who were totally blind, and they also did technical support on the computers. So I would suggest using DuckDuckGo and use that to find more about screen reader.
Okay, Nola, thank you. I just always figured that they're saying that it was a blind guy who ran a computer, who was doing computer repair work. Just seemed so incongruous. I thought that this was their way of saying we can say anything.
That in the Ministry of the Blind People, with the National Federation for the Blind, in the past, when things were done without computers, blind people got even a special license to run their own snacks costs.
Yeah. No, I get it. You know, blind people can do a lot of things that sighted people assume they can't. I totally get it, Nola. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate the call. Tom in Seattle. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Yeah, good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Previous call was complaining about the weapons we left in Afghanistan.
Right.
Mostly from the Afghani troops. We took a lot of our weapons out.
Right.
But I remember years before, people were complaining about all the weapons we were sending to Afghanistan for the Afghanis, and they couldn't absorb what they had. So why were we sending more weapons? Was someone profiting off of them?
I think that you can probably take that one to the bank, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing about our defense budget, you know, in the past we've had adversaries that we dominated economically. Well, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
We got to start spending more smart.
Well, that's the end of empire. I think that what we should do is put all of our climate change work into the Defense Department and call it the defense budget, and suddenly it'll get funded. Tom, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I don't even mind putting the Pentagon in charge of it, as long as there's a little bit of accountability. We'll be back with your calls after this. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Well, how you doing, Tom? I'm getting tired of these people with Ukraine. We gave them our word. If you give up your nuclear weapons, we'll protect you.
Yep, in 1994, the Budapest Memorandum. Yes.
Then why is everybody so upset when they think Joe Biden's going to send in a no-fly zone coverage?
Right.
We gave them our word.
I think that the Budapest Memorandum is and this is why I wrote a whole op-ed about it 2 weeks ago and spent a whole hour on this program ranting about it. I think it's probably the most underreported, unknown, unrealized, and I'm lacking adjectives here, but reality in the whole Ukraine situation that America just conveniently overlooks, Corky. I think that we should dust it off. I think there should be a debate and discussion about it. It was an agreement that was signed by the president of Ukraine, by the president of I don't know if the presidents of the United States signed it, but certainly on behalf of the president of the United States, on behalf of the president of Russia, and on behalf of the president of the United Kingdom, or the prime minister of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, the president of the United States signed it.
That's my recollection. Yeah, I don't know.
And
I don't recall exactly who signed it, but it's in my article.
My second question is, how come Trump gets away with committing felonies?
Because he's white and he's a billionaire.
Oh, I didn't want to hear that, Tom.
Hey, you know it's true though, Corky. If Barack Obama never would have gotten away with that stuff. He was, he's neither white nor a billionaire. He's doing a little better now, but he still has student debt when he went into the United States Senate. Donald Trump is a rich white guy, and rich white guys, there's a different set of rules in America for rich white guys. It's just, it needs to be said more often, frankly, because that's, the only way we're going to do something about it is by pointing it out over and over again. Just like, when Dr. Bay called me yesterday or the day before, I think, and pointed out that, there's people starving all over the world, not just in Ukraine, and but we tend not to focus on what's going on in Yemen or what's going on in other countries where there are. I mentioned Haiti, where it's brown and black people rather than white people, as in Ukraine. These are tragic realities. We can explain them with things like human nature or politics or party, or rather, great power interactions or whatever kind of BS you want to trot out. But those explanations are not justifications. We can understand how the process happens. It doesn't make it right. And it doesn't mean that we don't all have an obligation. And I would say for white people who have benefited the most from it, have a special obligation to do something about it. And in particular, at least for me, that means, calling it out and making it clear as often as possible. We have two justice systems in the United States, arguably three. We've got, one for very rich white people. We've got another one for average white people, and then we've got a third one for poor people who are also people of color. And
you just said something that I wanted to know. Who's going to pay for all the damage in Ukraine?
Well, that's a damn good question, Corky, because eventually we're going to get around to talking about something like a Marshall Plan. And I think that a lot of the pressure is going to come from the countries that have these mind-boggling numbers of refugees who want to get those refugees back into Ukraine, which means we're going to have to rebuild their houses. Corky, thanks for the call. We'll be back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Alex in Brighton, Michigan. Hey, Alex, thanks for listening to the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Well, this is actually about renewable energy. And, now a lot of interesting and efficient work has been done in separating salt water, into its components of hydrogen and oxygen. Mm-hmm. And that's great. And you can use solar and renewable energy to do so, right?
Right.
And it's more of a question, because I've looked into this. It's the idea of taking those two components and sending them via, pipelines, if you will. Sure, you could use the hydrogen directly, but if you could then reconstitute those two components back into clean water, because it has no salt, this might be a really useful thing that we should look at. Right now, all I can find is that we can use fuel cells for it, which of course would have the bonus of creating electricity, but it has its own, issues. Or you can take a large container and put the two components in and cause an explosion, which might be less than the right way to go. So I'm just posing to you, does this make sense? And do you know of any people who are looking into this method of desalinization?
Yeah. In terms of using it as a way of producing water, my guess is it would be relatively inefficient. Using it as a storage system for energy, though, I mean, on the one end, this goes back to pre-Einstein, that outside of nuclear reactions, energy is neither created nor lost ever. And so if there's a certain energy input to split a water molecule into its component of 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen atoms, then later when those are recombined through fire, essentially, the amount of energy that would be released when they're recombined would be roughly equivalent to the energy that was put in when they were torn apart. So you think of it in terms of an energy storage system rather than a cool way to come up with distilled water.
But I just want to point out that in that in using it for energy, creating an explosion, the side effect is you will get water.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Alex, thank you for the call. Mike in Wheaton, Maryland. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yeah, how you doing?
Good.
Hey, about the military, $85 million worth of military equipment left.
The Republicans love to rant about, yeah.
Yeah. Wherever America is done with a war, they don't bring stuff back.
By and large.
Like in Japan. They just pushed it off into the ocean because we got an industry. You can't be having stuff returning, and you have an industry that's jobs making the stuff.
Right.
And, it's only one way.
My understanding, Mike, is that the stuff that could have been relatively easily brought back, and not necessarily brought back to the United States. We've got 700 military bases around the world. It could just be repurposed or reprovisioned someplace else. Things like helicopters and airplanes and stuff. We got as much of that out of the country as we physically could. The stuff that we left behind that might have some value outside of scrap metal, we disabled, so the only value it would have is scrap metal. And we're pretty conscientious about doing both those things. But my point, I still think still stands that Trump, in his last year, shut down 7 of the 8 U.S. Air Force bases, which made it a hell of a lot harder for us to get both people and materiel out of Afghanistan. And that's the one that I think it's really important to push back at any Republican who starts squealing about Joe Biden left behind equipment in Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Because we're going to see the same thing play out in Iraq eventually. Yeah, Mike, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Also on SiriusXM, Ron in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Do you think it's possible that Democratic Senators Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are actually moles or double agents of the GOP? They could be in place to vote against key proposals that are voted in favor of by all the other Democratic senators, like the new billionaire tax proposal and getting rid of the filibuster.
I don't think it's Manchurian candidate kind of stuff. I think it's more good old-fashioned, we're going to pay you off. And my sense of it is that the people who are, the lobbyists and whatnot who are associated with the fossil fuel industry and the big banks and, whoever else wants to just, blow up anything that the Democrats are proposing, that they understand that they don't have to buy everybody. All they have to buy is 1 or 2 votes to block things. And, now, this Politico did a story about this about a month ago about how Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, for the first time, apparently, have started taking large quantities of money from the same billionaires who've been funding the Republican Party for decades. So I think that those guys just said, okay, we need to pick off a couple of Democrats in the U.S. Senate to just shut everything down, to stop all progress going forward, to make Biden look bad, to frustrate Democrats so they won't even show up to vote, to make, pave the way for the Republicans. Who do we pick? And they started looking around, who's the most purchasable? Well, you got Joe Manchin, who is already corrupt. He did this coal deal back in West Virginia that made him rich. And then you got Kyrsten Sinema, who apparently has no moral compass whatsoever and just says whatever she thinks is going to get her more power and more wealth. And they went for him. And then that's the sad story. I don't think you have to construct the whole Manchurian candidate thing. I'm all in favor of Occam's razor here. Ron, thanks for the call. Great question, though. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you for being with us today. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Take care. Stay safe. Get your boosters. And pray for peace in the world.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.